the LSAT score is extremely important. Very, very important. It is one of the most common metrics that we can take a wide pool of applicants that go through a variety of educational experiences and life experiences. You are never too old to apply to law school. We value the diversity of the student body, and your life experience being one of those items. One of the key points of law school admissions is being authentic and genuine and demonstrating who you are. I tend to think that AI for the moment is getting in the way of that. And so there are times that I will read statements that just don't sound authentic. They just don't come across.
Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for another Justia webinar. My name is Nina, and I'll be the moderator for today. Now, to kick things off, I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker today, Shane D. Cooper. Shane Cooper, JD03, is the Senior Associate Dean for Admissions, Financial Aid, and Student Services. In his role, he leads JD recruitment efforts and efforts to retain and support the current student body at Cornell Law School. He also provides strategic direction to the Dean of Student Staff on all aspects of counseling and student case management, serves as the primary point of contact for the Faculty Administrative Committee, and is the Officer of Record for Character and Fitness Certification to bar authorities. He previously served as Associate Dean for Administration and Enrollment at the University of New Hampshire School of Law, overseeing admissions, enrollment management, and administrative activities. The webinar presentation that you're about to watch will be approximately 1 hour, and as a core part of the presentation, Shane will be answering audience questions, so you can submit your questions today by clicking the Q&A button in the control panel at the bottom of your screen and sending them in there. Now, without further ado, all here is Shane to introduce himself and discuss law school admissions. Ask the admissions dean anything.
Thank you, Nina. I really appreciate it. And good day to everyone out there. I want to thank the Justia team for inviting me to join everyone for this question and answer session. I'll be saying just a few words here, but hopefully it'll warm up the crowd out there that has joined us for today to invite you to ask us just about anything about law school admissions, and I'll do my best to answer those questions for you. I want to be clear that although I am part of the Cornell Law School community, I'm not here to recruit for any particular school today. So in line with Justia's mission to make law and legal resources free for all, I'm hoping that this session will serve as a free resource generally for those that are applying to law school, or if you are thinking about applying to law school in the future. So the opinions and advice that I'm offering today are solely my personal views, and they don't necessarily reflect the views of Cornell Law School or of other institutions that I've worked for in the past. And I'll note, particularly with subjective matters like the law school admissions process, it's going to be very likely that you're going to hear some slightly different or even contradictory advice or opinions from others as you ask these questions and think about these topics in the future. So I hope you'll take my advice and the information that I offer today in that light. So Nina, I look forward to engaging with the questions from the audience members. I would invite everyone to throw those questions in there and see what I can do to help. And I also know that we've got some questions prepared in advance along the way.
Yes, thank you so much, Shane. So we did have a little opportunity for folks to go ahead and submit their questions early. So I have a couple of those that we can get started while we wait for the others to trickle in. But this first question, very broad, touches on what we're covering today is, can you walk us through the law school admissions process? And really related to that, what do admissions committees look for in applicants? What can they do to prepare in that way?
Great. That's, I think, a good opening question. Really set a broad scene here. So I guess one way to look at how you would answer what does an admissions committee look for and how does that process play out is really to look at most law school applications will ask for various pieces of information that are extremely common across all law school applications. One thing I'd like to dispel is the notion that there's this common app, if you will. I know other admissions systems can work in a sort of a common app perspective. In the law school environment, every law school has an application that asks varying questions that are a little bit different from each other. And the most common part of that core part of the application process is the test scores and the transcripts that you submit through the Law School Admissions Council. And having an account with the Law School Admissions Council is probably the most core common part of that. So I'd say one of the very first steps in the process as you are thinking about law school, whether you apply in the current year or in a future year, is to get connected to the Law School Admissions Council, lssc.org, and get an account started, because it's through that account that many of the activities of applying will take place. But so if we look at the different pieces of information that a law school will ask for, it gives you a glimpse as to things that we are looking at, and I can explain that here in a moment. So first, we're going to be looking for an entrance test score, because for an ABA accredited law school, one of the requirements is some form of an admissions entrance test, unless there has been some sort of variance or exception in certain cases allowed for by the law school. So the most common entrance exam will be the law school admissions test, the LSAT, by a large majority. There is also the graduate record examination, the GRE, which is accepted by some schools, and a smaller percentage of applicants will use the GRE. There's also an alternative test that's emerged called the JD Next, and some schools will accept that. And then other schools have variances or exceptions available through the ABA, where perhaps it's a different type of test, maybe the GMAT, for example, or no test at all. And so that is something you'd explore with the specific law school. But entrance test, that's the first key point. And what is incumbent to that then is, I think that's probably your entry point to preparing for your law school applications. It takes some significant time and investment of your time and self-study to get ready, or study through, resources that are available commercially to get ready for the LSAT or the GRE for that matter. And so one of the first steps that I'd suggest for anyone aspiring to law school is to really focus their time and energy on that entrance exam in the first place. The second piece of information that is required in every law school application is the record of your undergraduate GPA from any of the undergraduate institutions that you've ever attended. We'll also ask for transcripts from any graduate schools and graduate studies that you've attended. So we're looking at those academic items. All right, so beyond those academic indicators, most law schools will then always will also collect personal statements, optional essays, and other optional statements that might be offered in prompts by that particular law school. And this is where many law schools will vary. Sometimes it's a very generalized personal statement that's requested. Other schools have more tailored prompts they would like you to address. Other schools offer optional prompts or optional activities, if you will, to submit information to that law school. Resumes are typically required by every law school application. And so this would be sort of the standard resume that you would expect if you were seeking employment. In this case, you're seeking admission to a law school. This allows law school admissions committees to get a better sense of your professional experiences and how that might project or predict your success in the legal marketplace after the professional school experience is completed. We look for, usually most schools, at least 2 letters of recommendation. Generally, a letter of recommendation from someone that knows you well in the academic space, and if you have a work experience or internship experience, someone that knows you well in the professional space. And then there are various standard addenda that are either explicitly permitted or in the law school admissions world are generally commonly understood to be accepted. Addenda to describe things that we can't see or know about your GPA that you might want to explain, or your LSAT scores or GRE test performance. And then there are required character and fitness disclosures are other pieces of addenda. Some schools will also offer interviews, or you may just have informal interactions that can take place organically with the law school, whether you visit the school or you run into an admissions officer on a recruiting event. Any of those informal interactions, for the most part, likely aren't going to move the needle in the application process, but sometimes there can be some memorable moments, and the interviews certainly are formal moments where that could be considered within the decision process. All right, so I've described the various pieces of the application that you would need to submit. You can kind of think through the lead time you need to give yourself to have all of those pieces ready, from test preparation to thinking intentionally. If you're currently in an undergraduate course of studies or a graduate course of studies, to doing your very best academically, because that record will be looked at later, to then working on your statements, working on that resume, developing professional experiences if you're in the middle of that right now to bolster your resume, working with mentors and supervisors so that you can then communicate with them and seek those letters of recommendation. All of that's going to take you time. This is not something that you can rush, in my opinion, and do very quickly. It's sort of an intentional process. All right, so now that I've described what all of those pieces are, perhaps I can briefly just cover then what is the admissions committee looking for? I think that you can answer that question by kind of thinking through, well, what is the purpose of the personal statement? What's the purpose of the GPA, et cetera, et cetera? So first of all, we want the test scores. We want the GPA information because we want to understand what your academic abilities are. And do you have the abilities and the past performance to help us predict if you will succeed at the law school? Generally speaking, the LSAT or the GRE, along with your undergrad GPA, are proven to be statistically significant and are a valid indicator of what your 1L year performance would look like. So that is one way admissions officers look at that information, because we're just trying to project that you will succeed at the law school. By setting that now to the side, those hard metrics, those scores, we're looking for other qualities, such as strong communication and writing skills, critical thinking and problem solving skills. And then a few of these factors I'll mention that I think these are ones that I know we focus on at the current organization that I'm at. They were developed by committee and really talking to the admissions committee members and faculty members to really understand what are those qualities that we're looking for in our student body and our future alumni. So I'm just going to use these as examples. I can't tell you that every school looks at it exactly the same way, but if I offer these as examples, I hope that they'll resonate with you a little bit as to what we're looking for when we think of beyond the numbers. So one quality would be resilience and maturity, showing evidence of being able to overcome adversity, tackling challenges, and showing growth. We want people that are resilient, solution-oriented, open-minded, but will also be willing to seek help when needed, that you can compartmentalize personal issues while you're studying and learning from setbacks. You take ownership and you persistently move forward. Those that avoid blaming others and demonstrate self-sacrifice to achieve solutions. We're looking for people that are emotionally intelligent. The ideal candidate would use challenges as a learning and a teaching opportunity. They're focused on others. They listen actively and they're present. They respect and understand competing ideas and perspectives. They exhibit intellectual flexibility and they learn from mistakes for their own personal growth. We want people that are resourceful, those that make the most of their situations with the resources available to them. And we all know that people start from different starting points. What's important to us is to understand what you do with what opportunities you have in front of you. We want people that are positive contributors to the society and to the law school community. Someone that's community minded, someone that serves with integrity and passion to make a positive contribution to their community. You would initiate and support programs so that you're dedicated to improving others' lives. You show commitment and perseverance. You champion causes that are important to you and others, and you would demonstrate a philanthropic spirit. We want people that are professional, that you communicate well, you're punctual, you're responsive, you're a self-starter. Those that demonstrate charismatic qualities, that they're trustworthy, attentive, reflective, and skilled in critical thinking. Those are the type of examples that I could go on and on about. But if you can think about it, if you were an employer or if you're someone that's been seeking employment, if you're trying to join a new organization or a new team, I would like to think it's fair to state that the qualities I just described would be the things that you would expect to hear and would want to emulate. We understand that no one's perfect. If you could be all of those things that I just described, then good on you. But we also understand that, you don't have to be perfect in those ways. But if you can strive for that excellence and those traits that I mentioned, I think it will take you a long way beyond the numbers as you head into the law school application process.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shane, for all of that insights, for like kicking us off with that good overall overview. And then we did get quite a few questions, as you can imagine, about LSAT and GPA. So I'll kick us off with kind of the first question that we received, and we can go into related questions. And if you have other thoughts about LSAT or GRE scores, please feel free to sprinkle those in. So our first question is, how important is your LSAT compared with your GPA, student activities, activities outside of school, your personal statement, etc.? How would you kind of measure that?
Great question. And it's hard to give you, like a certain metric and say, this amount is this percentage. There's a weight. I'm not sure any particular school could even offer you what that could look like. I suppose what I can then is speak in more generic terms to say that the LSAT score is extremely important. Very, very important. It is one of the most common metrics that we can take a wide pool of applicants that go through a variety of educational experiences and life experiences and be able to bring us all into one playing field to take this examination that has been proven over time to be a valid predictor, a reliable predictor of law school success and the ability to succeed in law school. I'll be candid, notwithstanding the critiques that you hear about standardized testing. I can at least assert and respect that the LSAT is a valid and reliable predictor of success in law school. So that's why committees will look at that test, because it is extremely important and is a strong predictor for success in law school. The question mentioned GPA. Undergraduate GPA is also predictive of success in law school, but not as strongly predictive as the LSAT is. So it is an important factor, but I would say, speaking for myself, I don't look at the undergraduate GPA number in the same way in which I might look at the LSAT score, which is on a standardized scale. We all understand that undergraduate GPAs are different at a wide variety of colleges and institutions across the country. The rigor of the courses and the classes you take vary widely. The time and when you went to school varies widely. I'm very cognizant of the fact that there's been great inflation over time. So I personally look at transcripts from earlier in time in that context, in that light, knowing that there has been significant grade inflation over time. So it's important, but in my opinion, not as important as LSAT. To me, these just are essentially threshold questions. Again, this is my perspective on it. I'm looking at your scores as a threshold starting point to just let me know, do I feel comfortable that you are going to be able to succeed at that law school? If the answer is yes, that is just a starting point. And that's where it gets into the rest of the question, which is all of those other factors mentioned, statements, letters of recommendation, resume. Those are going to end up being, for me, the deal breaker. I guess a one thing I would want to dispel about this test score and GPA piece is that let's assume you have some of the highest test scores and the highest GPAs available. That in no way, shape, or form will guarantee you admission just about anywhere. Does it increase your chances? Absolutely. Do you maybe have a very high chance? Absolutely. But there are plenty of times that you review candidates with those profiles. And as you review the rest of the application, there are other deficiencies or aspects about the application that end up leading the committee to not offer admission. So when we say the word holistic, it's really meant in that spirit, which is you're looking at the entire package of the application. The numbers are a starting point, but they're definitely not the thing that will be definitive in any one case.
Thank you, Shane. That's really helpful. So we have a question here about GRE, and I'm just kind of wondering if it works similarly. But this person asks, how do you evaluate applicants who've taken the GRE instead of the LSAT, obviously for law schools where that's applicable?
Yeah, I can talk to my methodology or experience, and then you can look at other schools that might and ask these same questions, of course, of those schools. So a couple thoughts. The GRE comes in 3 different sections. The scores are given to you in different ways than the LSAT. There is a conversion tool that's available as a commercial resource through ETS, the testing service. It gives me a rough idea of what the equivalent LSAT score might be compared to the GRE by percentile achievement in the various sections. So, we use that as a rough proxy to just approximate, at least for me, kind of where the GRE is in comparison to what could have been the LSAT score. It's just a nice way to compare, two different test scores and different groups of test takers. Another way to look at this, though, from the applicant perspective is every school might treat the GRE in different ways. First, there's a handful of schools that just don't accept the GRE. Then there are schools that accept the GRE, but then may either admit many students with GREs or they don't admit and matriculate many students. And that can be a function of who applies to those schools. The best way to know these answers is to look up the ABA Standard 509 report from each law school. It's like a disclosure report. It's sort of like the nutritional label on a milk carton is the analogy that I provide. If you were to look in any law school's website, they are required by the ABA to have a disclosures page, and in there should be the ABA 509 report. It comes out every December to report the composition of the incoming class that showed up that fall. In that report, they'll start to report out medians, and you'll see a section for LSAT and you'll see a section for GRE. If typically, if you have enough GRE students in the class, then the school will report a median and they'll tell you how many students have GRE scores. That's helpful. You can see the median, so you can see the typical, the 25th, 50th, 75th percentiles of GRE test takers that went to that school. So you get a sense of the strength of that. And you'll get a sense of, wow, okay, 20% of the students in this class have a GRE. You may look at another school and then determine, oh, wow, they only admitted and brought in 2 students on the GRE. So that gives you maybe a sense of how much the GRE is used or favored at a particular school. Of course, the best way to figure it out is to talk with that particular school. But that 509 should give you some general starting point to determine how prevalent the GRE is used and relied upon by that particular law school.
Thank you, Shane. All right. So relatedly, this person asks if I've taken the LSAT multiple times, how do admissions committees view maybe score improvements or even fluctuations? What do you feel about that?
Yeah, this is definitely the territory of what I'll call subjectivity. I don't think, my opinion is that there is consensus around this, because I've certainly seen some well-respected admissions professionals opine in different ways about this. And it also depends a little bit on the trend and profile of what I'm looking at when I look at one person's LSAT history. So let me think through a few general examples that might be helpful there. If we see more than one score, it is certainly in front of us and we can see trends, whether you started lower and then went up progressively. That usually indicates someone who's just been preparing more. And then through that higher level of preparation, they got better with the score. You can see someone with a low score and then a really significant score jump. Typically, an addendum might be helpful in those cases, because the standard story that you would read about there is that someone took the test without much preparation or any preparation, which, by the way, I do not recommend, but it happens. And then you prepare, and then you do much better. And so you can explain the difference in the test scores. There is this, also understand that the ABA requires us, the law schools, to report the highest test scores. So there is this natural incentive, if you will, in the system where an admissions officer might at least emphasize or focus upon the high test score, because they know that is the one that will be reported for median purposes. However, in the background, what's in my mind is that I know, based on studies, that the average LSAT score is more predictive of your success than the highest LSAT score. Not by much, according to the experts in the studies that I've reviewed, but still, it's currently true that the average LSAT score is more predictive. So I'm on the Credential Assembly Service Report. You'll see this report and printout from LSAC with all your scores. It'll also tell the admissions officer your average score. So those are 2 numbers I look at: the average score, obviously the highest score. The other interesting phenomena is this idea of score cancellation. where you have this option now to pay for a preview of your score, and you can choose not to report your score, and then it'll show up on the report as a C, meaning canceled. I think that there's debate about when to do it, if you should. I can just say from my personal opinion, if I see a C on your score profile, and if I see more, these various scores, there's this natural human tendency to assume that that C is covering a score that's probably lower than what I'm seeing on the rest of the sheet. So kind of have to think through that a little bit about whether that's a good presentation of your scores or not, but that's certainly there. Others are very worried about taking the test 3, 4, or 5 times, that somehow admissions deans frown upon that. I think you would need to study a little bit more about how that school approaches it, whether that dean has said anything about it, and you can ask them at sessions like this. I tend not to get too worried about whether you take the test more often. I'm just looking at the results of the test to just get a better sense of, what is the general quality of this particular set of scores. Maybe one more example, Nina, before we go to the next question. Let's assume you took the test once and you score a 165. Okay, that's 165 is a good score. You did a good job. Let's say you take the test multiple times and we see, and I'm just kind of making up these numbers without any judgments, but let's say it's, 152, 157, 165, 158 after that. And the average is, and I won't do public math, but it's down 165. Okay, I see a high score of 165, but I see an average score that's lower than that. And I also see that you have a score that's lower than the one that you recorded your highest one in your third attempt. My opinion, that 165 is your high score, looks different to me than the previous applicant I mentioned who just hit the 165 one time and was done. So any of you out there can kind of evaluate numbers in these ways and kind of think about what does this look like to an admissions officer. And I'll also submit that I think each file reader admissions officer probably will do their own subjective evaluation, maybe a little bit differently than I just described.
Thank you, Shane, for that insight. Just departing for a moment from some of those hard metrics, LSAT, GPA, we do have a question here from an anonymous attendee. They mention their age. So they say, I'm over 40. Am I too old to apply to law school? Do you feel there are any disadvantages or advantages? I'm currently a school teacher, but I want to switch careers.
My opinion is you are never too old to apply to law school. We value the diversity of the student body and your life experience being one of those items. Of course, law school has to be right for you in the time in your life, the arc of your career, the resources and the time you have available. And if you feel motivated and compelled to go to law school after having done other things in your life, in the professional and the academic sphere, it is absolutely not too late to go to law school. I have encountered students who are in their 70s that had full other professional lives, or 2 or 3, doctors that want to become a J and get their JD. Plenty of, this person I think mentioned, did they mention their age? I think it was 40. Plenty of people over the age of 40 are in their 40s at law school. I think it's great because, if you look at a lot of law school bodies, it's more common to see students who are trying to get into their first career. So they're likely in their 20s. And different schools have different age demographics, perhaps, but it kind of sits somewhere in that 20s decade of your life, if you will. And so people that are more experienced, I think, really add to the quality of the student body and can bring their experiences. So please, 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 I highly encourage you that if this is right for you, that you should never worry about your age.
Thank you, Shane. And thank you, Anon, for sharing. Diving a little bit back into some of those hard metrics, we have a couple questions about overcoming some potential issues or fluctuations with those. So the first question is actually related to GPA. So this person asks, what is the best way to explain a low GPA without sounding like I'm making excuses in a statement?
Well, this will vary, of course, for the reasons why, you may have encountered or gotten the low GPA. I have to say, I can memorably, I can remember some compelling addenda where there may be someone who had, poor performance in their undergraduate time. This is more common maybe in an applicant who has had some time in between that time. Maybe they did graduate work and succeeded there, or they went off into the professional workforce and had a great career so far, and have done some rigorous work within the work that they have, such that that GPA doesn't reflect at all the quality of the person that we see here in front of us today from an academic perspective. And so the most effective statements I've seen in those cases are typically something where you take accountability and responsibility and you own whatever happened back in those times. It's okay to be candid and say, if this is true, I didn't take my undergraduate time very seriously. I had a lot of growing up to do. I matured, I learned from it, and then now I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I've done this research, or I've been in this particular field, and I have excelled and learned a lot. So please don't rely upon my undergraduate performance for that reason. There could be other reasons though that are not excuses. They're just it's life. Something may have happened in one of the semesters that really took you off the path. Perhaps it's family issues, personal health issues, employment challenges. I can vividly remember another compelling candidate who explained how they were trying to do college and a full-time job, and were dealing with housing insecurity, and then have gone on to do a very successful career. So I think it's important to be able to do that. I do think, though, that it's important to have good reasons, and try not to deflect blame, if you will. And just like the question that came in, I think they recognize correctly that if it sounds too much like an excuse and not as much of an explanation, then you probably want to go back and think about how to approach what you've written.
Thank you, Shane. Appreciate that insight. Our question is also similar, but is more related to LSAT scores. This person asks, my family includes successful attorneys who performed poorly on the LSAT. In your view, what can help you overcome a poor LSAT score for admissions, if anything?
I appreciate that question. I think the way it was initially framed by pointing to successful family members who had the poor LSAT and then overcame. I'll be candid and tell you that I'm not sure that that would help in if you're going to refer to that in your addenda for admissions officer. And I'll say that because and this could just be my impression, but I'm looking at you, the candidate, not your family, not someone else. It's not guaranteed through your family line or genetics that because they did it a certain way that you're going to do it exactly the same way. So I think that may not come across in the way that would help. Okay. So that would be the one piece. Poor LSAT performance. This is going to be based on context. So if I will say this again, my personal opinion could vary across other admissions officers. Let's say you've taken the LSAT one time and it wasn't what you wanted, and then you just haven't done it again. I personally find an LSAT addendum in those cases that kind of sort of throws in the towel on the LSAT and just said, I'm just haven't been a good standardized test taker, both in college for SAT admissions and now for the LSAT, and you tried it once. I don't find those to be very compelling. I do appreciate those that have attempted at the LSAT to really prepare. That's always in my mind is how hard did we work at the LSAT? How much time did we prepare for it? It is not, fortunately, whatever you describe it. In my opinion, the LSAT is not a test that you walk into cold and it just measures pure intellectual aptitude or the ability to succeed in law school. That's not how this works. It is a specific test that tests certain skills that do require some speed. It does require some ability to recognize patterns, if you will, and it does require preparation. And we all come at this in different stages in our lives. This is why I said at the very top of this webinar that when you decide to apply to law school, I think it needs to be intentional, and I think it's going to take time. that you really want to buy yourself the time to prepare for the LSAT. And so, with that said, if you have put in an earnest effort to apply yourself and do the very best you can on the LSAT, and you've kind of reached what we'd say, let's say, the ceiling, if you will, of your LSAT performance, and you're still not satisfied with where that's at from a score, yet you have other indicators in your life of how you have succeeded, how you did in your undergraduate work, how you're doing in the workforce and in the workplace. I think you can then build a strong case and let the strengths of the other parts of your application speak for you. And I'm not necessarily certain that an LSAT addendum in all cases, just to say, please, admissions officer, don't look at the score as much. Go look at this other stuff. You have to trust me. We're going to go look at the other stuff. While we also ask ourselves a threshold question, which is for this school, based on our history and our track records of scores, do we think that this person will succeed at this school? I don't know if I gave the most satisfying answer there, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't really see a way that the addendum will just cancel out, right, the LSAT, if you will. It's always going to be a factor that we're looking at.
Thank you, Shane. Kind of segueing into, we have quite a few questions about personal statements. So moving to that part of the application, this person asks, what are the most common issues you see in personal statements? If you're telling a story of quote unquote resilience, is it a bad idea to talk about a time that you made a mistake? What do you think in general about crafting those compelling personal statements? Can you share that with us?
So I'll focus in on the one comment about talking about mistakes. I think talking about mistakes can be a very good topic for a personal statement. I also think that they can be challenging and a little bit of a higher degree of difficulty, if you will, because here's the thing, right? A personal statement is meant to get you into law school. You are trying to be authentic and genuine and painting yourself in the most positive light possible. So sometimes we've all made mistakes, right? Sometimes you've made a mistake that do you really need to talk about it in your personal statement for a law school essay? Because is there gonna be something you've learned from it that's gonna then paint you in a positive light afterwards? That's where it can get kind of challenging, right? Depending on the mistakes you pick. But let's say that you pick, a mistake which shows, something really, it's not so much about the mistake, but what we were going to want to learn is what did you learn from that mistake? How did you overcome the results of that mistake? And where are you at now as a person and as a future professional based on that particular mistake and that sequence in your life? If you can turn the arc on that story from the initial, negative feelings of that mistake into the positive arc of where you're taking yourself, that can be an extremely effective statement. You just don't want to, dive into the mistake and kind of live in that and not find a way out to talk about that. So that's the specifics. I think more generally about a statement, and if it's okay, Nina, I'll put in the plug for our last webinar we did together a while back. If you go out on Justia, you'll see that we did a session on how to stand out and get in for law school admissions. And I talk about this in more detail. I think it's another resource you can go back to, as I point as a reference to go look at later if you haven't seen it already. But I would say that for personal statements, your goal is to be compelling. I want you to think about your statement and make that your North Star. Make that the guide. At the end of the time when you write this statement and you're about to hit submit, I recommend that you have outside readers look at it, like family members, people that know you well, friends. And the key question is that compelling? Was it compelling? If you don't feel like on a scale of 1 to 10 that, you're sitting somewhere in the zone of like 4 to 5 on a scale of 10 on compelling, then I would recommend you need to keep working on it. And the way to be compelling then is, I think, being authentic, genuine, reflective. You're looking back and contemplating on what you learned from the event. And then importantly, it's got to connect in a strategic way, aligning with your goals, your values, and the reasons or objectives of why you're getting into law school, right? Has to be connected in that way. You can write so many compelling things, but if it has no connection to your goal of getting into law school, or why law, why now, it's not necessarily on the mark for a law school admissions essay. Typically, most essays will cover the core question that should be there. And I would suggest for every one of you out there thinking about law school, you really need to have an answer to this, which is why law school? Seems like a pretty simple question, but if you really search your mind a bit and think about it, it can be difficult to answer for a while in your life. Why law? But then importantly, why now? Law school will always be there. So why now at this moment in your life is it time for law school? Um, maybe to some extent you would cover why this law school in your application. If you're going to do that, though, you really need to mean it, and you got to be in love with that school and be willing to write that extra part of your essay to really address it to why this law school. And I say that because if you try to build in that little paragraph at the end that says, and this is why I want to go to X law school, uh, we know as admissions officer, I can just kind of spot it. This is just the placeholder. This is how you're cutting and pasting whichever law school, and it doesn't feel authentic. I think in some ways it could actually detract from the essay. And the worst possible thing you could do is you won't actually catch your cut and paste error, and you actually tell X law school why you want to go into Y law school or Z law school, and then that's never a good thing either. So just be careful with that. I don't think you necessarily have to talk about why that school. Maybe in an optional essay you have that opportunity, but I do think you want to talk about why law, why now. Not any one winning formula, but to get to the part of the question that was asked, I can give you some ideas. I think that the compelling ones typically will cover a moment or a challenge or some realization that you had in your life. So some significant part of your life that either directly or indirectly will show your character and your motivations. Typically try to describe it in a vivid way to bring us to the moment of the scene of that realization or that challenge or that moment. You want to then hope that you pick one that's going to demonstrate you in some sort of meaningful light. That then shows how you were able to evaluate and assess yourself and your surroundings. And then very important, you're going to then move forward and talk about what you learned from that time, how you've grown, how that particular thing you talked about shaped your values, your perspectives, and your goals. And then at the end, you always want to look ahead. The whole point here, right, is I'm an admissions officer standing at the end of the finish line of your personal statement. I'm rooting for you. I want to be able to recommend admitting you. So where are you leaving me at the end of this statement? I hope you're leaving me in a place where I'm going to feel really good about the decision to recommend that you join the school. That means typically that you leave those essays in an optimistic, positive tone about how you grew or got to where you are today and how you're going to take it forward to join a law school community. So if you can kind of take a step back after you've drafted and written and worked on your compelling personal statement, you step back and ask yourself, is this compelling? Does this leave the admissions committee in a good spot where they're going to feel good about wanting to admit me when they get to the end of this story? I think those are good ways to look at how to approach your statement.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of that insight, Shane. Our next question comes with new legal technology and some curiosity this person had. So they ask, with the development of AI, have you been seeing an increased usage of AI tools either on the applicant or admissions side? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the answer has to be yes. Whether or not I can explicitly detect it in every case, I will say, speaking for myself, no. I know where I particularly work, I don't employ AI checkers or to even look at that. I think maybe I'll be wrong in a short amount of time from now, but at least for now, what I've generally seen is that if someone relies on AI as their starting point, I don't, I told you, I think one of the key points of law school missions is being authentic and genuine and demonstrating who you are. I tend to think that AI for the moment is getting in the way of that. And so there are times that I will read statements that just don't sound authentic. They just don't come across in the way intended. But I'm also not naive. I use AI in my life for different topics. I personally like to always start first and then let AI help me later. Because when I've done it the other way around, it's not either accurate or me. So I try to start with me, and then AI will help me along the way. And I'm not naive. I imagine there are people out there that are doing something similar as well. But I do think that overusing and relying on AI as a crutch will tend to get in the way of you trying to portray the most authentic and genuine person that you are out there. I may be proven wrong as AI gets better down the road, but for right now, that's part of it. I also say that, at least for where I work right now, this is another reason why we've moved into, and we've been doing it for several years, but why we also rely on the interview space, right? It's the one way that I get to actually engage or learn from the person themselves directly. And far as I know, I'm not dealing with deep fakes quite yet, or any other things to simulate them. So I am able to learn more about who they are, and sometimes I might detect um, inconsistencies, right, between what might be the written essay product and what I'm seeing through an interview process. In our interview process, we actually give written questions in a very short time frame so that I can see what your immediate answer might be to an innocuous question. Uh, Admissions officers also have access to your LSAC writing sample. This is an ungraded, at least for now, ungraded writing sample that allows us to see another sample of your writing in real time, or not real time, but just another sample of writing compared to everything else that you have. On the law school side, I do not use AI at all in our evaluation or reviews of applications. I am also I'm open-minded. I think there may be a space for that down the road, but it's certainly not something I'm incorporating right now. And currently, I'm very concerned if I were to try to use AI in the evaluation process. So that's something that we'll keep an eye on, though. It's a fast evolving technology for sure.
Thank you, Shane. Appreciate that. This person asks, during the application process, are there inquiries regarding the candidate's criminal records? If that's the case, must juvenile records be disclosed? How does that factor into the process?
To my knowledge, I don't believe any, or I know is at least not a common practice for law schools to do background checks. That's not something that is done. What we rely on in law school applications process is a self-disclosure system. And this is starting at the moment. We're sort of at the thresholds of the legal profession at the law schools, and we take it very seriously, the requirement to ask you about character fitness disclosures so that you can make that a part of your law school admissions application that then goes on file. 3 years later, after you go to law school, you'll be applying to a state bar examiner, and they're going to ask you all these detailed questions. And in the legal profession, one of the most important things is the duty of candor. We rely on self-regulation. We rely on your integrity to report everything that is required to be reported within those questions that you get. I think every state, though, has questions that are a little bit different. Our application, where I'm at now, based in the state of New York, we would usually use New York-based bar exam questions as our character and fitness questions, which are more extensive than other states in some cases. When I worked in a different state, I would rely on that state's bar examiner question, and we would model that one and put it in the application. So I think one aspect of the question can be some states and some law schools might not require that you report expunged records. Some states and some places will ask you report everything, whether or not it was expunged. Report everything, whether or not it was a juvenile matter. The important thing to do is, and I've worked with students who have stumbled on this, is don't assume the same question every time and then just do this one approach to your 10 law school applications. You really need to look carefully at every school's questions and answer their questions and be as forthright as you possibly can. I will nearly guarantee you that almost anything that you disclose is likely not going to be the deal breaker. And if you don't disclose it, and it will come up later down the road in your career or during law school, the fact that you did not disclose that is going to be a big problem for you. So I highly recommend that you lean into the disclosure side of things, read the questions carefully. And it's very possible that one school, one state is going to ask you a more, let's say, intrusive question that you have to disclose versus another school that you don't. It's just the nature of that particular bar exam authority. But like I said, if you disclose a juvenile matter, I mean, if anything, I can't think of an example that has been a deal breaker. I mean, in many cases, typically what it demonstrates is that you've had some experiences, you've had some adversity to overcome, and now you have overcome them. So it can actually be maybe turned into a positive in that particular regard.
Thank you, Shane. Appreciate that response. This next person asks, when applying to law school, do you have to live in the state that you get accepted into, or can you have classes online?
Okay, this will depend a bit. One way to look at this question is that if you are hoping to take advantage of an in-state tuition rate, some schools have in-state tuitions that differ significantly than out of state, then it may be to your advantage to be a resident of that state when you apply to law school. Some schools have ways that you can become a resident of that state while you're at law school and then take the advantage within a year or so of the in-state tuition rate. Other schools might have an extremely strict rule in that state where it didn't matter if you didn't start in that state, you won't be able to get the residency rate, and that's not an advantage to you. Um, Most law schools are in-person experiences, so assume like you apply to a law school that's in person, you will need to expect to move to that place in the August of the first year, and you need to account on being present in that state and meeting the school's residency requirement, meaning you need to go to classes and be in a full-time status and go to these classes in this brick and mortar building at this location or city. So you should count on in the in-person experience to be there. However, over the past, let's say, 7 to 8 years, the rise of hybrid programs and online JD programs have grown. There are some law schools that have received ABA approval to be purely online schools or hybrid schools, meaning you have to be at the school periodically, but most of your classes are done online, either online live or asynchronous model. So if your life situation is such that you're looking for an online or a hybrid experience, those are more available now than they were a decade ago. And so that's definitely a different type of law school experience to look into. I happen to be associated with one in my past, and I found that those programs expanded access and opportunity to those students, particularly working professionals that could not afford to essentially turn off all salary and turn off their lives for 3 years and go full time into JD mode. So that hybrid or online JD program can be a way to do it. There's also the brick and mortar part-time programs that are done in the evenings over 4 years. So that's also another option for people out there.
Thank you, Shane. I know we have about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get to some other topics. So this person asks, how do I choose the right recommenders, whether I've been out of school for a few years or just in general? Can you share your tips on getting those recommendations?
Great. So a few categories of recommenders to consider. The most common is, and hopefully, and I recognize if you've been out of school for a while, it can be tough, but hopefully a professor or an academic mentor that has some experience with you where they taught you in a rigorous class or supervised your research work. Maybe you've done graduate work and it's been a while for undergrad, then it would be fine to reach out to a graduate professor. We recognize in some cases it's just not possible, and we extend grace, particularly to those that have been out of school for a while. But if you can, it's really nice to be able to have that. If you have the academic recommender, I think it's a bonus if the recommender would be willing to speak about your character, your personality, how you got along with classmates, and how you were as a member of the community. I think some of the professors really focus in on the scholarly part of it, which is great. But if there's a way for them to, and you can encourage them, and I'll talk a little bit about guiding them, if you can encourage them to maybe talk about you as a person, I think that is important. More important, in these days where we're really looking in this holistic way at our applicants. Um, you know, for those that have been out of school a while or you've have meaningful work or internship experience, then I'm going to want to see something from there, like a professional supervisory letter. It's really great to hear about someone's work ethic, professionalism, communication skills, judgment, how you get along with coworkers, supervisors, subordinates, if you lead anyone, and those examples of leadership. Those are just tremendous. Much like you'd want one as you're seeking another job, we would love to see those sort of professional supervisor letters. You don't have to, but if, let's say, you're working in the field of law, maybe after school or in an internship. It is good to hear from an attorney or a judge that knows you and has worked with you closely and can talk about your performance in that sort of law setting and can talk about your potential for future growth and success as a lawyer. Those are always good to have, not required. I don't see them as commonly, but if you have one, that's great. I would recommend family friends. I'm sorry, recommend avoiding. Did I say recommend family? I said recommend. Yeah, that was bad, but we'll have to edit that one out later. Do not, in my opinion, use family friends, politicians, or other famous figures that don't know you. Now, if they know you and they can say great things about you in that sort of supervisory way or professional way, great. But just picking a celebrity name, if you will, if you have a family connection or some other way, is not typically very helpful. Working with recommenders, how would you kind of work with them and guide them? First of all, ask early and ask personally. Give them at least 6 to 8 weeks notice. Be mindful of when you might be catching a professor. Are they on a summer break or in the middle of exam grading periods? Just kind of catching the professors at the right time, or your supervisor, or whoever it is that you're asking for. Give them enough time and notice to be able to help you. And then when you ask them, maybe you would ask it like this or similar. You should say something like, would you feel comfortable writing a strong letter of recommendation for my law school application? I think feel comfortable will give them an out. Because if you get someone that is like, nah, I really don't think, I don't have much to say, or I don't want to say, or whatever, you don't want a lukewarm recommendation or a half effort, right? So give them an out. And then strong recommendation, meaning like you need someone that you know is going to go to bat for you. So that way you kind of weed out the recommenders that may not do their best effort or give you the best recommendation. I think it's reasonable and helpful. I know I've written letters of recommendation for people that you might offer to provide your resume, perhaps a brief summary of goals and why you're pursuing law school. Maybe remind them of specific points that they may want to consider highlighting in their letter. Give them a little bit of information. Maybe it's been 2 years removed and they don't remember your thesis paper that they supervise as well as you do. Maybe there's this project that is meaningful that you think is going to sound good in the law school application perspective, and you would remind your supervisor about that project. I would also say this: the more you know your recommender and the more you're comfortable with them, I think the easier that process and the prep is. And if you're working with someone that maybe doesn't know you as well, but you still need to lean on them, that might be when you need to supply them with some materials to offer them to consider as they're crafting their recommendation. You may want to offer context. So if you're dealing with a professor who has written hundreds of recommendations for people going to law school, they probably are totally fine. But maybe you're going to work with someone else that isn't as familiar about law school admissions processes and the things that maybe they're looking for. So you might want to set some context about, this school is looking for my analytical ability, my writing skills, my ability to succeed in an environment. I think that's helpful. Another, let's say, mistake that I've seen or something that you might want to consider is you can let the recommender know that you're applying to a range of schools or a particular school, but assuming you're going to apply more than one school, these letters are compiled in a central credential assembly service by LSAC. And what I don't recommend is that your recommender write a letter that says, I recommend this person for X law school. You recommend to be more generic about recommending you for law school, because there will be times that I'll run across a letter of recommendation that this professor says, I recommend this person for this law school, and it's not my law school. And I'm not going to hold it completely against, but I also have to think, well, there must be some conversations going on here. And obviously my law school isn't the main law school under consideration at this moment. Or maybe the recommender is confused or something like that. So it's just something to consider when you're working with the recommender. Last thing I'll leave you with is I see people stressing sometimes about getting those letters of recommendation in. Everything else is ready to go, and now you're waiting on this one letter. So gentle follow-up reminders as deadlines approach. You may be imposing some artificial deadlines. Let's say you have a desire to get this thing in by Thanksgiving. Then you want to give your recommenders a deadline, and maybe it should be a little bit before Thanksgiving. And remember, again, you've already talked to them 6 to 8 weeks before that, so it doesn't feel like, you asked them 1 week ago, and then 1 week later, you're like, hey, where's my letter? I think that's unreasonable, right? So you want to give them some time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shane, for that insight specifically on recommendations. We're just about at time. I know there were a few topics that we didn't touch on so much. We want to thank you all so much for your questions. And Shane, thank you again for your time and your thoughtful responses. We appreciate it so much. We want to thank you all for joining us for another Justia webinar. As we mentioned at the top of the presentation, we know that law school is just the beginning, so we want to make sure you're ready for what comes next. So you can always visit our Law Student Resource Center. That link is in the chat. It's connect.justia.com/law students, and you can explore new legal job opportunities, AI career tools, student-focused webinars like this one and the one that Shane and I have done previously, and resources that are built to help you thrive with your studies and your future practice as well. Thank you all so much again for joining. Thank you, Shane, for your time. We hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next video.